Okay, welcome everybody to the March Planning Committee at Gedling Borough Council. Please note this will be live streamed and available, saved, so available forever. As we have observers present, I'd just like to a loose explanation of the top table. To the right of me are 2 legal officers, and then there's 2 democratic services officers, and to the left of me is planning officers. Okay, and I'm Councillor Roy Allen. Right. Okay, and as we've got so many observers, could you just be quiet during the deliberations, please? That would be really helpful. Thank you. So, agenda item 1 is the apologies for absence and substitutions, but there are none and there are none. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. I would like to propose the draft minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have a seconder? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Any comments on their accuracy? Okay, so we're happy to vote on these minutes. All those in favour that they are correct record? Anybody against? And any abstentions? I wasn't at the last meeting. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 3. Are there any declarations of interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary? Right, that's all good. No. So move on to agenda item 4, which is the proposed battery energy storage system at Burton Wood Farm, Spring Lane, Lamley. We have 2 speakers. The first speaker is Ian Taylor, who's speaking on behalf, is an objector and speaking on behalf of local residents. So, Ian, if you'd like to approach the lectern and start when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. Right, is that on? Everybody hear me? Excellent. Right. I'm here to represent the 200 people who've objected to this planning application. And we're extremely strongly supported by our local MP, Michael Payne, who agreed with all our objections in his letter of the 18th of February. And I hope you will follow his lead. We were told that we would have a full public consultation. We've had no feedback from either the council or Grenergy on the many questions that we were asked. We were basically ignored. Public safety is in this planning report has hardly been mentioned, and all particularly fires in the batteries, which will produce toxic smoke and fumes. The fire authorities failed to say whether they are for or against the proposal. The firefighting strategy is totally inadequate. Do you really think in the event of a fire, somebody will run the length of the site, put a plug in a pond, and then organise a fleet of tankers to pump out the pond every 5 hours to stop it overflowing, whilst the fire blazes around them? I don't think so. Houses in Main Street and Lamley will be flooded more rapidly and severely during extreme rainfall as a result of water pouring off the site. If it was your house that was being threatened by flooding, you would not vote for this planning application. The sound of 241 cooling fans at 85 decibels will travel further than the few metres beyond the site boundary. Where is the independent expert review of the noise assessment to prove that it's correct? And what training and experience do the planning have, and you, councillors, have in order to take such important and critical decisions? The best installation is massive. It will decimate the local wildlife and destroy part of the Dumble farmlands forever. The site will be permanent. 30 years is not temporary. This planning application would not be approved without the use of very special circumstances. Grenergy have provided absolutely no evidence that they actively looked at alternative sites. They have not followed legal due process, which invalidates their case. By Grenergy's own admission, they put cost and viability over location. As local residents, we put protection of our environment, health and well-being, and safety over this development. This planning application contains too many post-approval conditions. You are voting blind on public safety controls that have not been made public. Grenergy claim they're good for the planet and good for the local community. They are neither. It is bad for Lamley and Burton Joyce, and there's nothing in it for the community. There's only one course of action for you here, and I shall hope you will follow Michael's guidance and refuse this planning application. Please vote and refuse. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Silent, please. Thank you. Thank you. I will remove you from the meeting if you don't stop. Okay, that won't happen again. If that happens again, I will adjourn the meeting and you will be asked to leave. And this meeting will be done in private. You'll be able to see it on the internet if that happens again. Is that okay? I didn't ask you to speak again. Right, anyway, your timing was perfect, actually. And thank you. Now we have the speaker for the applicant, Jonathan Cooper.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan and I represent Grenergy, the developers behind the proposal before you. I want to start by addressing the climate and energy crisis we are experiencing at a local level. Year upon year, we witness more severe weather events and rising air temperatures, leading to droughts, floods, and harm to our nature and wildlife. Regarding energy supply, the UK now has the highest electricity prices in Europe, primarily due to our reliance on natural gas, a fossil fuel. This impacts us all, especially those of our older population, many of whom struggle to heat their homes due to rising costs. Excuse me. Publicly available data shows that 80% of people in the UK are either fairly or very worried about climate change, and that around 30% of older households in England are now in fuel poverty. We need abundant, cheap and clean power, and the solution is renewable energy. However, renewable energy is intermittent. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. Worst of all, if we don't use this power instantaneously, it is lost. Last year, we spent £1 billion turning off renewable power because we could not use or sufficiently store this energy. Battery energy storage is a technology that allows us to harness this renewable power when it would otherwise be lost. Under the Clean Power 2030 Action Plan from our government, battery energy storage plays an essential role in achieving our goals for clean, affordable energy. The Spring Lane proposals we have put forward are for this technology at a site deemed suitable on social and environmental grounds. Extensive technical reporting and engagement with statutory consultees have confirmed this, and we trust them to accurately assess these impacts using their qualifications and experience. We are aware that members of the community have presented alternative sites deemed suitable. Unfortunately, upon review, these alternatives fail to account for key planning considerations, which would be unacceptable at a policy level and simply not viable. In terms of safety, battery energy storage systems use the same lithium-ion cell found in your phone and laptop. There are over 100 operational utility-scale battery sites in the UK, with numerous regulations and protocols to prevent, detect, and suppress thermal events. To conclude, the application before you has demonstrated with evidence to cause no significant social or environmental impact, as backed by your trusted statutory consultees. This project helps our climate and energy crisis and is backed by national planning policy, where significant weight can be given as a contribution towards net zero. By approving this proposal, you are supporting a cleaner, greener future for our community. We therefore ask that the scheme is approved with your case officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire Turton will now introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. So before I start, there are some verbal updates to this application. The measurements of the battery unit stated in paragraph 3.3 of the committee report are incorrect. It should read that the battery units proposed are 2.795 metres in height, 1.72 metres in width and 7.81 metres in length. The skids are raised 0.15 metres above ground level. With regards to section 5 of the committee report, policy LPD 10 pollution is also relevant. This states that planning permission will not be granted for development which would result in an unacceptable level of pollution or is likely to result in exposure to sources of pollution or risk to safety. And the final update, further correspondence has been received by neighbours, but I believe these have also been sent direct to members of the planning committee too. You might have to click. Perfect. So the site comprises an agricultural field. It is located between the villages of Lamley and Burton Joyce within the Greenbelt. The site is bound by mature hedgerow. It's working now. And you can see I've just drawn an arrow on where the site is on this Google image. These are photos of the site itself. This is the access road up to the site. And this is the site from Gedling Country Park viewing platform last summer. And I've just tried to get the information board in that picture for a bit of context. So access to the site is from Spring Lane via a farm track, which passes a group of agricultural buildings, a number of which are in use for commercial purposes. This access road is also a public footpath and a bridleway. The nearest residential property from the site is approximately 100 metres away on Lamley Lane. And this is the block plan. Full planning permission is sought for the installation of a battery energy storage system, or BESS for short, and its associated infrastructure. Development is shown in full on the submitted plans and includes 192 battery units within storage containers, cabinets, a control centre, a welfare office, 14 CCTV cameras, and an attenuation pond. These are some sections through the site, and due to the changes in levels through the site, there will be 4 tiers of land created, which will require an element of retaining walls. The upper tier, close to the access, would incorporate the majority of the ancillary equipment. So this is going through the site from west to east. And then the one at the top is going through the site the other way, looking at the width of the site. And these are some plans of the ancillary equipment proposed. And these are the battery units. The lower 3 tiers would have skids upon which the battery containers would be placed. The battery containers would measure 7.81 metres in length, 1.72 metres in width, and 2.795 metres in height, and would be similar in appearance to shipping containers. The site would be surrounded by a perimeter fence, and the existing vehicular access to the north would be unaltered. And the proposal operates by taking excess electricity from the grid at times of low demand, storing it in batteries, and releasing it back into the grid when demand is high. The development is proposed to be in place for a period of 40 years, when it will then be decommissioned and the land returned to its former state. And if planning permission is approved, that can be secured via planning condition. Statutory consultees have raised no objection to the final proposal. However, there are a large number of neighbour objections, as well as 1 letter of support, and the local MP and the parish councils also object to the application. All consultee and neighbour comments are summarised in section 4 of the committee report, pages 51 to 57. Turning now to the assessment of the proposal. It is first necessary to consider whether the proposal is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Paragraph 153 of the NPPF states that inappropriate development is, by definition, harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Paragraph 154 lists certain forms of development that are not inappropriate in the Greenbelt, but renewable and low-carbon energy proposals are not listed in paragraph 154 as not inappropriate development. So as such, the proposal is considered to be inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, and therefore there is a need to consider whether or not very special circumstances exist to allow planning permission to be granted, and this will be discussed toward the end of this presentation. The impact of the proposal on the character of the area will now be assessed. A Landscape Visual Impact Assessment, or LVIA, has been submitted by the applicant in support of the application and looks at the impacts of the development from various public viewpoints. The most significant visual impact would be at the site entrance from the public right-of-way. However, with appropriate mitigation in the form of planting, this would be reduced. From nearby major roads, there would be no change in that views would be restricted and transient in nature. The site is visible from the raised viewing platform in Gedling Country Park, but restricted from the wider park itself. The council commissioned an independent landscape consultant to review the applicant's LVIA, and he largely agrees with the applicant's conclusions in relation to these viewpoints. The independent review concludes that the development will broadly be absorbed within the site and its surrounding landscape, with moderate to slight visual impact, but that it would appear uncomfortable in this greenbelt location and local landscape. Conditions are suggested to minimise the visual impact of the proposal, and these include conditions regarding soft landscaping and a restoration condition to restore the land to its previous use once the battery storage facility life has expired. Turning now to the impact of the proposal on residential amenity. A noise impact assessment has been submitted in support of the application. This identifies that the nearest receptors would be the properties on Spring and Lamley Lane, over 100 metres away from the development, and that any noise the site would generate would dissipate prior to reaching these properties. These are the slides submitted with on the slide here are the diagrams submitted with the applicant's noise report, which shows the noise levels at the centre of the site where the battery units, and it's the fans that make the noise, would be, and then how that dissipates. This is the nighttime level, which is slightly higher than the daytime level. So in the daytime level, it would very much be constrained to the site. At night, there would be a little bit on the public footpath, but by the time it gets to the neighbouring properties, it is a lot lower by then. The council's environmental health officer agrees with the applicant's assessment and does not require any mitigation measures. With regards to highway safety, the Highway Authority has raised no objection to the scheme. The access point is considered to be safe, and whilst there would be construction traffic associated with the build of the scheme, this would be temporary in nature. Once built, the need to access the site would be limited, save for maintenance. The Public Rights of Way officer has also raised no objection to the proposal, subject to informatives being attached to the grant of any planning permission, advising the applicant of their duties in relation to the public right of way. Turning now to flood risk and drainage. The application site lies within flood zone 1 and is therefore at the lowest risk of flooding. The drainage strategy for the site indicates that the majority of the site will be constructed with permeable materials. A suds pond is also proposed to serve the development. The Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority raised no objections to the scheme, subject to a pre-commencement condition stipulating the provision of a detailed surface water drainage scheme. Turning now to fire risk and contamination. There are no specific national or local planning policies relating to fire risk for BESS sites. This is covered by other legislation outside of the planning system. However, the local planning authority has liaised with the fire authority. The fire guidance that the fire authority refer to suggests a standard minimum spacing between units of 6 metres, unless a clear evidence-based case for a reduction can be shown. The footnote to this fire guidance states that this is based on an informing document which has since been revised in 2024. The updated informing document now suggests separation distances of 1.5 metres between battery units on sides that contain access panels, doors or vents. The proposal does comply with the updated informing document, and this is considered to be a clear evidence base for reducing the 6 metre suggestion set out in the fire guidance. The fire guidance also states that there should be 2 separate emergency vehicle access points to the site to account for opposite wind directions in case of a fire. This proposal has 1 single access onto the larger site itself, which is from Spring Lane. Then within the site splits into 2 access tracks, one to the north and one to the south of the batteries. The distance from where the access point splits and the nearest battery container is 132 metres. As such, it would be very unlikely for smoke from a battery container to block all split access points. The applicant has demonstrated this with other examples of best proposals allowed on appeal where any potential fire plume was not considered to be as large as 132 metres and therefore unlikely to block emergency vehicle access to the site. If planning permission is granted, a condition, number 4, is proposed requiring precise details of a safety management plan and emergency response plan, which will detail how the development will be operated safely for its lifetime and how any emergencies will be managed. With regards to potential contaminated water, the method for tackling a BESS fire is boundary cooling, so no water should be sprayed at a container on fire. Therefore, the water should not be contaminated. However, the water that is used will flow through the internal drainage system to the attenuation pond. This pond is lined to stop any water leaking into the ground, and it is also shut off with a fire water isolation valve. There should therefore be no fire water flowing into the fluvial network. The pond has capacity to store over 5 hours of fire water runoff, and the applicant will contract with an emergency waste water disposal service who will tanker off the water and safely dispose of this. Now assessing issues of ecology. A number of ecological assessments have been submitted in support of this application. The Council's Ecology Officer has assessed the proposal and has verified that with suitable conditions, the application would not have an unacceptable impact on ecology in the area. Such conditions include development being carried out in accordance with precautionary working methods, the submission of a biodiversity enhancement plan, wildlife sensitive lighting and replacement ground nesting bird plots. With regards to biodiversity net gain, or BNG for short, the proposal far exceeds the 10% requirement in BNG and will result in an on-site biodiversity net gain of 160% for linear habitats, 40% for non-linear habitats and 130% for watercourses. And this will be secured through standard BNG conditions should planning permission be granted. Neighbouring objections have argued that more appropriate alternative sites for the proposal exist. The applicant has submitted an alternative site assessment concluding that there are no other suitable alternative sites within the area. To find a suitable site, firstly, a viable grid connection is required at a substation. There is only 1 substation within the Borough of Gedling that will support this technology. This site here shows all of the viable grid connections within the Nottingham Derby area, and there is only the one in Gedling, and then the red arrow on this aerial photo here shows where that substation is. Due to feasibility, the site is required to be within a 3-kilometre cable route of the substation. The site cannot be located within a flood zone, and in this case, there are no sites of the required size that do not lie within the green belt and meet these requirements. Neighbours have pointed to the Severn Trent site close to Stoke Bardolph as a suitable alternative site. However, this is also located within the green belt and is within flood zone 2. It is also grade 2 agricultural land, which is classed as best and most versatile. It should also be noted that there is no stipulation within any relevant planning policies requiring the applicant to carry out a sequential test for site selection. Turning back now to whether very special circumstances, or VSCs, exist. Paragraph 160 of the MPPS states, and I will quote it in full, "When located in the green belt, elements of many renewable energy projects will comprise inappropriate development. In such cases, developers will need to demonstrate very special circumstances if projects are to proceed. Such very special circumstances may include the wider environmental benefits associated with increased production of energy from renewable sources. The NPPF therefore provides for a balancing exercise. The proposed scheme has clear environmental benefits in terms of energy security, energy flexibility, and energy generation. Whilst not generating renewable energy itself, it would stop energy from a variety of forms, both renewable and non-renewable, being wasted, meaning that less overall energy will be required to be produced. There is also a need to consider paragraph 161 of the NPPF, which states that the planning system should support the transition to net zero by 2050. National Policy Statement EN1 indicates that energy storage has a key role to play in achieving net zero and providing flexibility to the energy system. Storage is needed to reduce the costs of the electricity system and to increase reliability by storing surplus electricity in times of low demand and to provide electricity when demand is higher. Storage can provide various benefits locally and nationally, and these include maximising the usable output from intermittent low-carbon generation, reducing the total amount of generation capacity needed on the system, providing a range of balancing services to help operate the system, reduce constraints on the networks, and help to defer or avoid the need for costly network upgrades as demand increases. In this case, the great weight attached to the contribution to mitigating climate change and to energy security is considered to outweigh the temporary moderate to minor adverse landscape and visual effects of the proposal. Accordingly, it is considered that very special circumstances do exist which justify the development, and as such this application is recommended for approval. I'll just leave you with the 3D proposal of the site, which may make the image a bit clearer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Right, I would like to propose agenda item 4 for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ellis, thank you. Are there any speakers? Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and thank you for those contributions to the meeting. I just want to make some comments, please, which I'll try and contain to the green belt and flooding and fire safety, if I may. Green belt, I've read paragraph 15.8 and read it again, and the planning officer just said that special circumstances exist if it is an environmental benefit to mitigate climate change and support net zero. As far as I've been able to read in the papers presented to committee today, I can't see that this application delivers any of those, Chairman. What I can see is a lot of greenwashing. The batteries, as far as I understand, are manufactured in China. The lithium's dug up in Central Africa. And then the batteries, are proceeded to be made in China and shipped to us.
Sorry, that's not material to this.
Well, it is, because it's about the Greenbelt, and we're talking about special circumstances to the Greenbelt, and I'm just trying to, from the research I've done and read about that, to comment on what's in front of us, which
Please carry on.
I don't think is true. I think we're being slightly misled here. To manufacture the batteries and get them installed in Lamley or Burton Joyce will create more CO2 than the batteries themselves will save during their lifetime. I just don't think the special circumstances to the Greenbelt argument stacks up at all, and it's not carbon neutral. It's complete nonsense. Can I ask a question as well to the planning officer? It says that this development on the Greenbelt is only temporary. 40 years is a lifetime, or half a lifetime, not temporary. What would happen to this site, please, after those 40 years? Would it go back into the Greenbelt and be restricted, or would it become brownfield and open ourselves up to flooding? If I can, I've got a few more points which you may be able to answer, but we'll come back to that one. On flood mitigation, in Burton Joyce, there's been a hell of a lot of work and investment into preventing flooding throughout the Croc Dumble. £50,000 has been spent on installing leaky dams, which slows the water down, and planting trees. All that work, I worry, if this application gets passed, would undo, because the attenuation pond will release, I think I've read in the report, 6.3 litres a second into the Croc Dumble at a normal rate. If the pond overflows, water from 4 acres of hard standing, because we've heard, I think you may be able to correct me, planning officer, but I think you said the site is permeable. It's not, from what I've read in the pack, because there'll be sheets underneath all these, underneath the pebbles, to prevent any chemicals getting into the watercourse, which makes it a non-permeable site, which means all the water could run off this site and go into the pond. And if it does go into the pond during heavy rainfall, which the storms we've seen, could release 378 litres a minute into the Croc Dumble, which would flood, in my opinion, over recent storms, will absolutely wipe out Burton Joyce and potentially Woodborough and Lamley at the same site. So just a query on whether it is a permeable site, because from what I've read, it's absolutely not. And during heavy rainfall, some of the flooding we've had at the moment, that could be 500,000 litres within 24 hours going straight into people's houses. So I question the permeability of this site. I think that is nonsense as well. And it will be a bit like we see at Rolleston Drive with the runoff there. Just on fire safety, if I may, another question for the planning officer. It says that the no fumes or chemicals from the fire would and water would go in to the Croc Dumble and into the watercourse. I think I've read it right in the pack, the only way to prevent that is when the fire brigade turn up, they have to run through the blaze of fire, even though we've just heard from the planning officer that we can't tackle it. They'd have to run through the blaze of fire, get to the bottom of that site that you can see on there, and put a plug in the pond, like you'd have to put a plug in your bath at home to stop it overflowing. Who on earth from any public body is going to put their life at risk to stop that happening? So what we're basically saying, if this passes, is don't worry, Burton Joyce, Woodborough and Lamley. The fire brigade couldn't get through the blaze. They've been told to stand back and just water the edges. We couldn't put the plug in the retention pond because somebody's life would be at risk. So instead of risking the life of the fire brigade, we'll risk the life of 2 or 3 villagers as a result of contaminated water running into the watercourse. If this, and by the way, paragraph 4.18 I've read, the fire authority are inconclusive on whether this application is safe. Inconclusive. Well, I'm not inconclusive of whether we should risk the life of residents as a result of passing this application. It's complete nonsense, it's complete greenwashing, and for the reasons I've just set out, I will be voting against this application.
Thank you. Claire.
Yeah, so I think the first question was about the 40 years and the decommissioning of the site. So if planning permission were to be granted, there would be a condition on to say that after 40 years, the batteries are taken off site, they're dismantled, and the site is restored back to its previous use, which is an agricultural field. So there would be a condition covering that. With regards to its greenbelt status, if this planning permission were to be granted, the site would still be greenbelt, even though it's got the development on it, it would still be greenbelt. That can only change through an allocation in the local plan. So that will come up to review every time the local plan comes up to review. With regards to whether or not the site's permeable, the vast majority of the site would be placed on semi-permeable gravel, not hard standing. So the water would go through that, and then there would be the pipes underneath, which would catch the water, and that would go to the attenuation pond. With regards to fire safety, this is something that we have spoken with the fire authority about. they did make it very clear that their job was not, they didn't want to support or object. They made that very clear to us. Their job was to provide advice, and that's what they've provided us with. If there were to be a battery fire, and that's not overly usual. There have only been 2 in the UK since battery sites have been around. Their method is to not spray water at the battery that's on fire. Their method is to let that battery burn out, but to spray water on the surrounding batteries to cool them so that they don't catch fire. So there shouldn't be any contaminated water, even if there were to be a fire. But if there were, then the attenuation pond is lined. It has got that plug to stop it. So that's why there are a lot of things in place to stop the contaminated water getting into the system.
Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Smith, you obviously raised quite a few very interesting points, and just for clarification for members, I think there's a lot of concerns regarding the impact on the green belt, and you rightly highlighted the very special circumstances within the report. Officers are by no means wanting to mislead members in any way, as you said, and I can assure you of that. We're obviously applying the relevant planning policies to our decision, in which we are trying to justify that within the report. Just in terms of the demand, the National Electricity Transmission System Operator, or NESO, as set out in paragraph 15.7 of the report, sees a 4- to 5-fold increase in demand flexibility, with, amongst other things, an increase in grid-connected battery storage from 5 gigawatts to over 22 gigawatts by 2030. So this is national planning policy that we're trying to interpret and apply here. So we're in no means trying to mislead anybody. And I do take your point about the manufacturing, but that's not something that we can consider here, because we don't have any evidence of how these batteries are being manufactured or transported to the site.
Thank you. I just want, if I can come back on that point.
Of course.
The exceptional circumstances to develop the Greenbelt that have been presented to us today, and I quote, because I wrote it down as it was said, was to help contribute to the government's net zero achievements. How can that be the special circumstances that we're saying, okay, you can develop on the Greenbelt for that, if the project that you're approving is not net zero? This project will not be net zero. So we're building something to help mitigate climate change and contribute to net zero that isn't net zero. I just don't understand how that decision's been founded by officers on exceptional circumstances. I don't understand that. And for me, it's just doesn't make sense.
I think we could debate that all night, Councillor Smith. I think that's what you're identifying then is potential policy failure at national level. Obviously, we're being encouraged to drive electric vehicles, which are potentially manufactured in China and in other countries and then imported to the United Kingdom. Just for clarification on some other points, flooding, you raised concerns that the site could release 378 litres per minute. I think that's still greenfield runoff rate at 6.3 litres a second. So we are looking at restricting runoff to the existing greenfield runoff rate, and the County Council have confirmed that their projects to ensure that the flood channels and the dumbles have been cleared isn't affected by this proposal. The County Council have confirmed that. In terms of the previous flooding to Burton Joyce, the County Council's Section 19 report did identify that following investigations by the County Council and Severn Trent Water, they found that the watercourse originating from the north of Woodside Road had an unauthorised connection into the Severn Trent combined sewer system, which caused a surcharge in the system, which contributed to the flooding. And that is in the published local Lead Flood Authority report. It's available on the County Council's website. In terms of fire safety, there is a website available that sets out global grid scale storage deployment and failure statistics, and that's from the Electric Power Research Institute. That showed that the failure rate of battery energy storage systems has dropped 98% from 2018 to 2024. So it is a minimal failure rate now as technology's improved. But there's always a risk of a failure. There is with any technology, and it's the same with electric vehicles. But having regard to the information that is available to us, we do think that failure risk is minimal, and that this development would be safe for the future.
Sorry, Chairman, just to come back on the flooding point. I represent Burton Joyce, as you probably can tell by the passion here, but Woods End close flooding has nothing to do with the Crock Dumble whatsoever. The Crock Dumble comes down Bridle Lane and Lamley Lane and floods Main Street in Burton Joyce, which this will plug into. Nothing at all to do with Woodside. Woodside was a third-party connection to the foul drainage system, which Severn Trent had taken action on. I just wanted to clarify your point there, because I didn't want committee misunderstanding that.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we got our next speaker is Councillor Barnes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I'm not saying we don't need this facility. We have got climate change, whether we like it or not, and I do have concerns regarding the flooding, the noise and the fire fumes if there was a fire. It's not fair to residents around, and this is of no benefit to me because I'm a Daybrook councillor, I'm proud to be so. I would stand up for them also. There are issues that do worry me a bit. There are many conditions to be adhered to, and so if this is passed, I hope it will all be adhered to, and it will be for the 40 years.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Catherine Pope.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank both the speakers and the planning officer for the information. I thought everyone spoke really well and it was really helpful information. I have sympathy with the residents, but equally as a planning committee member, I also need to think about what are the benefits of this for the wider population in Gedling. And I note the answers that were given to some of the points I was going to raise concerning the flooding and fire risk. And similarly to Councillor Barnes, I also note there's a large number of conditions, and I just wanted to clarify in terms of the condition concerning the emergency planning and where the fire service has been non-committal to date. Can we have assurance that as that condition, that will include that the fire service has to sign that off as sufficient? And I also have a query about the reporting about failure rate dropping by 98%. That's kind of a meaningless statistic without knowing what it was and what it's fallen to. 98% of what would be useful to know. Subject to those assurances, I'm minded to support the recommendation. Thank you.
So I can answer the question regarding condition 4, which asks for a battery safety management plan and an emergency response plan. This was something that we discussed with the fire authority and the applicants. We've had a few meetings with them. And yes, it is something that the fire authority is aware of. It's been used at other BESS sites within Nottinghamshire that they've been dealing with. And it is something that, if approved, we would be reconsulting them on when it came to the discharge of condition application.
In terms of failure rate, apologies, I thought the mic was a little closer. So in terms of failure rate, obviously there's been a lot more capacity installed globally between 2018 and 2024. So in 2018, there was probably about 1 gigawatt hour of capacity installed globally, and there were 16 failures. In 2024, that's gone up considerably to over 300 gigawatt hours. These are global figures, and the failure rate there has been, in 2024, 8 incidents.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Whiting.
Thanks, Chair. Like the other previous two speakers, I have sympathy with the application and the need to move away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. And obviously battery storage is going to have to be a part of that. But if this is such a strategically important application, I'm surprised to see in point 4.4 of our agenda pack tonight that the National Grid didn't respond for comment. I would have thought they would have been all over this in support if it's so important. And I know others have said it before, but I'm going to say it again because it needs to be said that I don't think we should be being asked to support an application that the Fire and Rescue Service are not in support of. I take the planning officer's point that it's not their job. Now we might think, well, is it their job or do they not want to say no? I suppose that's a debate we could have. At least it wasn't Siri saying they didn't understand. There are obviously issues around battery fires. There was a recent incident in Mansfield, and I know there are issues with putting them out. I know that paragraph 12.1 of our report says, quote, fires are rare, and there have only been 2, but I suspect the people living near those 2 sites might take a different view to whether fires are rare or not. And I see we have got this space reduced from the recommended 6 metres to 1.5, and that's in line with the informing guidance, as the officer says. But I wonder if there's any precedent for that, or is this the first site in the country or in the area that would have that? Because that would seem to me that we're being the guinea pigs for this. And I agree with what Councillor Smith said about flooding. And obviously, I think it was the speaker in support said that we face a climate crisis. Well, that is increasing flooding and increasing the severity and increasing the frequency. So I think that's a problem as well with this. And Councillor Pope mentioned the emergency response plan and the safety plan. I think we should be looking at that now before we give this application our consideration, because we are going into this a little bit blind, and we are going in with one hand tied behind our back. And on top of everything that we've already heard about the Greenbelt, I see that paragraph 143, subparagraph B, says a purpose of the Greenbelt is to prevent neighbourhood towns from merging. But then the first bullet point of 7.5 in our agenda pack says that's not relevant here because Burton, Joyce and Lamley are not considered to be towns. Well, that just seems purely semantic to me. It's irrelevant whether Burton, Joyce and Lamley are towns in my eyes. If we're merging them together with this development, then that should be enough. In the absence, I believe, in the absence of the very special circumstances for that. So I'm afraid, Chair, on the basis of what I've said and what I've heard this evening, I won't be able to support the recommendation.
So I think what your first question was, have other best sites been approved with separation distances of less than 6 metres? Yes, we have looked through appeal case law. The one that springs to mind is one at the Neighbouring Authority Bassett law that's been approved with less than 6 metre separation distances. And then you spoke about, I think the other question was whether Lamley and Burton Joyce are towns or villages. So we've had a new MPPF. And there's been some updated guidance on that as well, as to what constitutes a town and a village in terms of greenbelt purposes. And it does make it very, very clear in the supporting guidance to the NPPF that when it says merging of towns, they do mean towns. It specifically says it cannot be villages, unfortunately. So that's what the guidance says, so that's why we've gone with the guidance.
Okay, just briefly come back, Chair, thanks. Do we know what the distance is between the batteries in Bassett Law? Less than 6 metres, is it more than what's being proposed in this application?
I don't know offhand. I think we can look into that as we speak.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, I just want to speak to Councillor Smith. Within your comments, you said that to quote, that you represent the residents of Burton Joyce, hence my passion. Does that mean that you were predetermined before you came into the meeting?
No, it's just a fact that I do represent Trent Valley.
So you were not predetermined?
No.
Okay, thank you. Right, my next speaker is Councillor Greensmith.
Thank you, Chair. This planning application is technically in my fellow councillors' Trent Valley ward, but it's going to seriously affect the residents of my ward, predominantly the residents of Lamley. Although I'm not against the idea of a battery storage scheme per se, I do think this application before the Planning Committee tonight raises a lot of questions and concerns. This is borne out, as you can see from your own agenda packs, that Gedling Borough Council have received over 200 residents' letters, and you can see the residents that have taken their time tonight to look at this. I have major concerns about this. This site is going to be remotely managed, and for something to be built in the Greenbelt, there has to be very, very special circumstances, which, from reading this application pack, I can't see. We've talked about the updated National Planning Policy Framework, Para 160, and I'm not going to go over that again, but that's been already stated. But I haven't seen in our packs the evidence that alternative sites have actually been looked at in detail. There's a lot of conditions that are going to be organised after this meeting. How can we really vote on something without seeing all the facts? I am concerned about this. My fellow councillors have raised concerns about flooding. As you're well aware, Woodborough and Lamley really, really flood. And I've had in Woodborough a case of where attenuation pond collapsed. It sent a surge of water down to the point that it did knock some of the residents or the flood wardens off their feet. It's clearly a site where there could be major fire risk. The concerns around a fire creating chemical smoke in the air, where's that going to land, especially if there's water around? What happens if it's raining? What happens if it's windy? All these things we really, really need to look into in a lot more detail. The noise. Now, I've heard somewhere, and I can't tell you exactly where, I think it was in one presentation, that the fans or the cooling system on over 200 units on this site is somewhere in the region of 85 decibels. Now, I'm not a health and safety expert, as many of you know. I'm an accountant. I look at numbers. 85 decibels to me sound really high. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that if you're working in a factory, you have to wear earmuffs or ear defenders. If it's windy, people are going to hear this, especially at night. You know, I appreciate that the applicant has done a sound assessment, thank you, a sound assessment. But has the planning officers looked at this in detail? What specialist advice has been taken by this council? There is a lot of questions that, to me, haven't been answered, and I'm really, really concerned around these things. You know, 30, 40 years life, to me, is not temporary. And if there's been retaining walls, as per the application, that smacks to me of, you know, this ain't going to be a greenfield site when it's supposed to, if it gets through committee tonight. I think that's it for the time being.
Thank you.
So I think there were two questions in there. One was on alternative sites. So the applicants, there's nowhere in policy that says that the applicants have to consider alternative sites for best sites. But nonetheless, the applicants have submitted an alternative sites assessment, which is available to view in full on our electronic file on the website. What this has done is it's identified the substation, and then it's drawn a 3-kilometre ring around it. Most of that is either greenbelt. Most substations are at the edge of an urban area. So that 3-kilometre ring around it, a lot of sites are then within the greenbelt. Unfortunately, a lot of the ones that aren't within the greenbelt, they're either already developed, the residential areas, or they're within the flood zone. If I just go back to show you, you can see the red arrow as to where the substation is. So yes, a lot of those sites within the 3 kilometres are either greenbelt or within the flood zone. But the applicant has submitted an alternative sites assessment to look through other sites. But there isn't anywhere in policy that does say that they have to do that. I think your other question was regarding noise and whether the applicant's noise report has been assessed. Again, I'll go back to the slides. Yes, our environmental health officer who deals with noise, he's not only assessed their noise assessment, but he has been out and visited the site as well. So yes, some of the equipment is noisy on the site itself. It could be a worst case scenario of 88 decibels, but this does very much it disappears before it gets to the residential properties. And what our environmental health officer has said is that acceptable background noise levels in a bedroom is 30 decibels. And this proposal here, by the time the noise hits those neighbouring properties, it would be less than 30 decibels. So it would be less than the acceptable level within a bedroom.
Councillor Greensmith.
Can I come back on this noise level?
Please.
What assessment have you done on the report that you've been given? The background noise won't mitigate 85 decibels, or 88, as you said, officer. I'm really, a background noise on a greenfield land, it carries You know, I've been to concerts, I'm sure many people have, and you've come out and your ears are ringing. And 88 decibels sounds horrendously high to me. It will carry it, you know, in a quiet area. Bear in mind, this is at the top of a hill. It will go down the valleys, and it's going to hit all the residents. You're sitting outside on a summer...
Sorry, you're questioning the validity of the assessment.
Yeah, I am, very much so.
Shall we get to the question?
And what's been done about assessing the wind and the carry, you know, has someone outside who knows more about these things assess this?
Thank you.
Just for clarity, all the reports are assessed in detail by statutory consultees. So in terms of the noise report, our environmental health team have scrutinised that in detail. And also, we've got to consider that they are professionals that have drafted these reports. The report writer is a member of the, I think I've jotted that down actually. So the noise assessment author is a member of the Institute of Acoustics and also a member of the Institute for Environmental Science. And it has been scrutinised by noise experts in our environmental health team. In terms of the landscape and visual impact assessment, we've actually gone out to a chartered landscape architect to have that scrutinised to ensure that the decision is robust. In terms of the flood risk assessment, we've used the County Council as the lead local flood authority, and their flood officers there have commented and raised no objection. So all the technical reports are scrutinised by the relevant specialists on every planning application.
Just this once.
Thank you, Chair. Has this been assessed in wind? There's no evidence in our pack.
Thank you. I think you're going to get the same answer.
If there was an issue with the methodology, it would have been flagged by the environmental health team. But that is the answer. There's no concerns regarding the methodology used in the report, and it's been scrutinised by the relevant specialists.
I'm sorry, you've just not answered my question.
Sorry, I think you've had 3 goes at this. Thank you. Right, my next speaker is Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to make some observations and then I have 2 questions for Mrs Turton at the end, if that's okay. I largely agree with what my colleagues, Councillor Greensmith and Councillor Smith, have already said. I'd just like to draw, I'm going to go down a slightly different tack, if I may, on my observations. Just like to draw members to page 53. 4.2, it says points in opposition of this application. And you'll note there's 27 of those. Various things, flood risk, fire risk, development will be prominent in the context of the surrounding views, etc., etc. You can all read them. Then next to it, there are points in support of this planning application, and there is one. And that one says the new facility is in line with the aims of the new Labour government. That's the one thing in support of this planning application. Furthermore, can I also mention, we've spoken already about how the Green Belt is designed to keep towns apart, but not villages apart. I don't know if Gedling is classed as a town, but the earlier picture demonstrates it quite well. If this went ahead, there'd be about 2 fields between Lamley and Gedling. I've looked at it on Google Earth. I'm not sure that constitutes keeping 2 towns or villages apart. And finally, I mean, do we value our villagers in Gedling so little? even in the pack we've had, it said this is within open countryside. It's close to ancient woodland. It's close to a designated local wildlife site. Do we value our villages in Gedling so little that we're prepared to put something like this on the side of a hillside, which, to misquote our king, would be a monstrous carbuncle, in my view? It'd be a scar on the landscape. And Lamley is a beautiful village. Not as beautiful as Ravenshead, obviously. But you know, we have beautiful villages in Gedling. We have Woodborough, we have Lamley, we have Burton Joyce, Ravenshead, Limby, Pathwick.
Sorry, can you make a point, please? Right, and don't talk to people on the side.
Okay, so my point is, the thing that we've not mentioned, Chair, is this is an incongruous view in the landscape, in my view. And so, apart from the fact that it doesn't, to my view, meet the very special circumstances required, it should be refused on those grounds. And if I may, can I just ask my two questions of Mrs.
Please
Turton?
do.
Thank you. First of all, should there be an environmental impact assessment in our pack? Because I can't find one. And the second one, are officers aware that in South Derbyshire there was a recent question asked as to whether planning officers making the decisions are properly trained on the BESS procedure? And if you have, then great, please let us know. If not, then please tell us if you're comfortable with making the decisions that we've made without that training. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in answer to your questions, there is an environmental impact assessment with this application. A screening opinion was submitted prior to this application, and the answer was that it wasn't EIA development. So no, there shouldn't be an EIA with this application. As planning officers, we are all trained and qualified in planning. And the areas that we're not trained in, that's why we go out to the specialist consultees. So we go out to environmental health for noise, we go out to the flood risk authority for flooding. So yes, we are trained in planning, and then the statutory consultees are trained in their specific areas. But as planning officers, we have to assess a wide range of applications. So although we may not have dealt with a best site before, we are constantly dealing with different types of applications, and that is our job to assess that with the help of the statutory consultees.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Elwood.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a query on the nighttime noise levels. I wonder whether it's possible to have a look at the screen for that again. It might just be easier to describe that. Looking at that map, I just have a query concerning that building, that sort of long, oblong building to the sort of northwest of the site. Is that agricultural building, or is it a residential property? Because that may have some influence, some bearing on the noise impact. Thank you.
Yes, so it's not residential. They're agricultural sheds. From my site visit, I do believe some of them are being used for commercial, so they're a mix of agriculture and commercial, but they're not residential.
Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to the debate tonight. It's been very interesting. I do have quite a few concerns, particularly around health and safety, because I can't find a fire risk assessment in the paper anywhere. And for me, obviously climate change is really, really important. We need to tackle that. But equally, health and safety is as well, in terms of the safety of residents. So could you tell me if there is a fire risk assessment, please? Thank you.
Yes, there is. All the documents are on the online application, which is on our website. I do know that the applicants also do have their own fire specialists as well. So we have sat down with lots of meetings with the applicants and the fire authority and their fire specialists. So yes, they have submitted information, and we have had a lot of meetings with regards to that as well.
Thank you. What does concern me is the quote in here from the Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue, which is basically inconclusive. It's basically saying that we need to support it or for it. And for me, that raises quite a lot of questions still around fire risk in that area, given the location. So on that basis alone, it does raise quite a few questions in my head in terms of what would happen if a fire did break out there. So unfortunately, on that basis, I'm minded to vote against this application on the risks around health and safety. Thank you.
My next speaker is Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I must commend the planning officers for the very complex application they've had to process, as well as leaving us to read it. So really, it's important that we have this sort of thing. I'm not opposed to the principle of a BET. It's important that we take full advantage of renewable energy and future-proof the power supply for the whole of the community. And that is what I take in mind. I can't really focus on one particular part of it. There are things that concern me, similar to Councillor Wheeler, and I gather that the fire brigade are quite happy with one access point that divides into two. And I see from the map there is a what looks like an access point on the northeast corner. I take it this can't be used, but it would seem that if when they published their plan, which we haven't got, they might decide to expand their access. Another thing that's been mentioned before is there seems to be some confusion about the separation distances for the clusters of batteries. I'm not really any wiser now whether it's going to be 6 metres or 1.5. And it's a pity that we haven't got this, what they call it, the battery energy storage system, the battery safety management plan, even in draft form. Another thing that I was concerned about is the noise. I read the noise report. I thought it was very interesting. And I think it's probably quite right. It was noted that one day when they tested it, wind made the decibels go up slightly more, but it was not very much, and probably no more than people experience now anyway. But it did say that the power level input from the for the inverters was 88 decibels, and that was 80% of the fan speed at day and 50% during the night. 78 decibels for 50% during 50% power during the night. If you need specialist help with this, I acknowledge you might not be able to answer me, but I just wondered if on a hot summer day, this test was done in February. On a hot summer day, there might be some differences in the noise output. But there was some very interesting detail in that report, and I read it. I like all that sort of thing. So that was really it. I think that the report said that no mitigations were needed for noise, but if the mitigations would take the form of various types of planting, and it's got to be landscaped anyway, could not those mitigations for different sort of trees or plantings be incorporated in the landscaping anyway? I'm quite happy for this sort of development to take through. I think we need it. I think it's important for our future, and not just in our lifetimes, but in future. I would ask that the safety plans, like any risk assessment, any safety review, should be reviewed annually. So it could be there are different improvements that come every year. I would like to see an opportunity for the council to look at the safety plan when it is written, and what guidance is actually going to be used for this situation. But I think it's something that we have to do, if not now, then certainly in the future. Near future, I don't mean in 10 years, I mean in a month or two. We'll see what the result of this meeting is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the distances between the battery units are set out in paragraph 12.3 of the committee report. With regards to noise levels, I think their report did say that weather conditions can affect the levels marginally, but our environmental health officer has taken all that into account, and he is still happy with the predicted noise levels. And then with regards to landscaping, if approved, condition 7 just does ask for full details of any proposed landscaping, so that can be dealt with through condition if the planning application is approved.
Can I just say something extra? There are a lot of conditions. I hope all the conditions are fully complied with strictly, and I'm sure they will. So that's all right, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Niall.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Yes, I want to say thank you to the officers, to everybody who's prepared these very intense and factual reports. I just want to say that this is relatively new technology to us, and because it's new, it does bring out a lot of fears and a lot of misunderstandings because it's new, as new technology has always done forever. So I understand that people will be worried and will need a lot of reassurance that this is going to be okay, and our conditions that we have put will cover a lot of that, and I hope reassure and ensure that it's going to be safe in the future. In terms of the flooding, I walk this footpath a lot and have done for many years. It's on one of my regular dog walking routes, and it's extremely muddy at the top. So the runoff from those fields is quite incredible. I can actually see it sort of happening. There's no evidence of this is just my feeling, that because of all the mitigations that have been put in on this site to deal with flooding, the flooding issues that are occurring at the moment will actually help those rather than make it worse. That's my perception. I know people here are laughing,
thank you, everybody.
but you know how muddy that footpath is. You know what the runoff is on that path. I can't walk it unless I've got my Wellingtons, especially at the top end. And the noise, I walked it the other day, as I often do on a Tuesday, and the noise from the road was very considerable and loud. And there's a communication tower at the other end of the path which hums as you pass it. I don't know if that is the sort of noise level that will be expected from this development. And from people I know who work in this area, the hum it's a very gentle hum which can only be heard as you pass it, which is the same as the communication tower. Because of all the mitigations that have been put in the conditions, and the fact that this is important new technology which we desperately need for the future of our children and grandchildren, I'm inclined to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been taking a few notes and listening to everyone in the chamber, and I can completely understand where Councillor Greensmith and Councillor Smith are coming from. I represent a village of which I'm very passionate about, and I am concerned about the environmental impact. But what I just want to mention is something that hasn't been touched on, only briefly, is about the single track road to the development and the impact of if the development got through, on the amount of lorries when this development is, if it gets through, is being developed. It isn't a wide road, it's on a bend, on a busy road in and out of Lamley. There are going to be huge lorries taking this equipment and buildings down to that site. And I'm not sure whether that's really been taken into account. I know you say it's temporary, but Spring Lane, I've lived in Lamley, I know Spring Lane, it is busy, that bend is not a good one. And I'm extremely concerned that Highways had no objections, and I find that very disappointing. And I just think there's too many unanswered questions, and I'm not completely reassured myself. So I don't think at this moment in time I will be voting for this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
So paragraph 10.2 of the committee report does deal with vehicles accessing the site both during construction and, if approved, once it's operational. So the applicants have submitted a construction traffic management plan, which we have sent to the County Council Highway Authority to assess, and they've raised no objection to that. This does state that during the construction phase, there'll be an average of 4.2 HGV vehicles a day entering the site. That's during the construction period. If it is approved, once it's operating, there wouldn't really be the need to access the site very often, only for maintenance, and that would take place 2 to 3 times a week, usually by an LGV or a 4x4 car.
Thank you. So we come to the last speaker as indicated, which is Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. And can I echo the thanks to the officers for the thorough and succinct assessment of a complex issue, and to the objectors and the applicants for their contributions to the discussion. Very clearly, this is an inappropriate development in the Green Belt. But the very special circumstances, I'm convinced by them, the importance of net zero and battery storage being part of the solution. This application came in a year ago, so the planning statement points out that the then Conservative government ministers were supporting the case, and that there are a number of cases where inspectors have allowed appeals on the basis of very special circumstances. So I think in that case, the very special circumstances are demonstrated. I'm not convinced it's an attractive development, but it's important that the landscaping schemes proposed mitigate it. In the light of the discussion, it's actually resolved, in my mind, to 2 particular issues, which have been touched on, but I will go again. One is the risk of the fire and the effects, and the second one is the noise. I'm comfortable with not having a fire safety assessment with this application, because I'm not in a position to judge the fire safety. You know, our fire service professionally work with a range of industrial sites to develop site-specific safety plans. So they're the professional advisors who can work with the developer, and it conditioned that they have to do that before any development happens. So I'm happy that will mitigate the fire risk. The other area that concerns me, though, is the effect of noise. I've seen the noise impact assessment, and the planning policy framework does call for mitigation to be given where necessary. Now, I recognise that the environmental health officers advise that no mitigation is necessary, but I wonder what experience has the developer had elsewhere. I mean, this is not their first site, so they must have some experience of that elsewhere, and what arrangements are in place to monitor the noise. I can see that some noise, low-level noise running 24 hours a day, if it is perceptible, can cause issues to people. We all know when people complain about there's a noise I can't pin down, and we wouldn't want to create that. So are there any arrangements for monitoring that as development proceeds? Thank you.
Thank you.
So our environmental health officer has assessed the noise report, and that isn't a condition that he suggested. It is something he could have suggested if he did think that it would have been an issue. That is within his remit, but in this specific instance, given the data available, it isn't something that he suggested.
Thank you. So I can't see any other speakers. Councillor Greensmith.
Can I, if we're going to the vote, Chair, can I request a name vote, please?
We need a seconder.
Seconded, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. We are having a named vote. We're going to go to the vote. Councillor.
Sorry to delay the vote. I just wondered if the planning officers had been successful in finding the distances between the battery units in Bassetlaw.
Yeah, 3 metres.
Well reminded. Thank you.
Okay, so after I call your name, would you please say for, against or abstain? Councillor Allen?
For.
Councillor Barnes?
Against.
Councillor Beswick?
Against.
Councillor Elwood?
For.
Councillor Ellis?
For.
Councillor Greensmith?
Against.
Councillor Nayuk?
So was that me? Yeah. For, sorry.
Councillor Pearson? Councillor Catherine Pope?
For.
Councillor Graham Pope? Councillor Smith?
Against.
Councillor Strong?
For.
Councillor Walker? Councillor Wheeler?
Against.
Councillor Whiting? And Councillor Wilkinson?
For.
Okay, so that's 9, 4 and 7 against.
That is carried. Permission is granted. Our visitors, you're welcome to stay, but if you want to leave the meeting, please do at this moment. Thank you. Could you leave quietly, please? Can you leave quietly, please? Good night. No conversations with the committee members, please. Please leave the auditorium. Please. Thank you. Could you progress through the double doors, please? Okay, so now we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is a position statement on the green belt policy. Nigel will introduce the item.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be relatively brief, but there's been some ambiguity in case law really with regard to the definition of original in respect of development within the green belt, and it has led to a few circumstances whereby we will get a replacement dwelling based on the 50% threshold that we look to use in terms of disproportionate extensions to developments within the green belt. And then once that replacement dwelling, for argument's sake, is built, and then there's been cases where then they have then looked to use that as the original dwelling and then get another 50%. So you can obviously see that some of the dwellings are growing disproportionately. And then really to just try to negate that and to stop that happening in the future, on page 78 in the policy statement, we'll just really be looking to clarify that the original building in terms of disproportionate extensions will actually be the original building as opposed to the replacement, which so they can't in effect keep making dwellings larger. So it's just really to seek that clarification and to hopefully stop disproportionate extensions occurring in future to replacement properties. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to propose this item formally for the purpose of debate. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Does anybody want to speak on this item? Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify? So the original building will be the 1st of July 1948? Is that what we're saying? Yeah, okay. In that case, fantastic. I'm really pleased that we've brought this before the committee, and I know the ambiguity that we've had in the past in delegation and other committees, so I'll be really pleased to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? Councillor Greensmith.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just get this clear in my head? We're talking about a property that was built in the 1940s or whenever, and we can only, if this is approved, it can only be built by a further 50%. We can't have 50% on top of 50% on top of 50%. Does that make any sense? I'm just a little unclear. I know I'm relatively new to the planning committee, so I'm not au fait with all the previous things that have gone to this committee before.
I think the question is a good question. It's something we're familiar with on planning delegation, but I don't think it's come through committee, this particular problem that we've had. So Nigel will update us.
Apologies, I should have explained it better. Say there's an original dwelling that was at 1948, we'll say for argument's sake 100 square metres, then they may well then look to extend it to get to 150, and then someone then, for argument's sake, would then apply to replace that dwelling with a 150 square metre new dwelling, and then they could then start to build, another 75, another 50% on that. So then we get to a dwelling that might be 225. And then, for argument's sake, someone then might say, well, I want a larger dwelling, I'll demolish that building and replace it. So it starts to get cumulative. So it would, in effect, then say, no, your original dwelling is the 100 square metres as in 1948. So that's, apologies, I should explain it better.
Thank you for the clarification. I just wasn't 100% certain.
I think it's a problem that's come up through appeal, case law and appeal. Yeah, so we're just closing that loophole. Okay, anybody else want to speak? Right, so we're going to move to the vote. The recommendation is that the committee supports the interpretation of the policy documents set out in the appendix. So all those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item 6 is for noting. It's an appeal summary at 178 St Albans Road. Do we have any comments at all from any committee members? Are we happy to note it? Yeah. Thank you. And it's another appeal summary is item 7, which is 238 Mansfield Road. Any comments from committee members? Are we happy to note it? Yeah. So item 8 is future planning applications, which is for noting. Any comments at all? So we're happy to note those as well. Yeah. The next item is agenda item 9, which is the planning delegation action sheets, which are for noting. Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chair. I won't detain us long, I hope. On the 28th of February, action sheet planning delegation panel, application 2024/0873, HU to Close Colic, the erection of a pair of semi-detached properties was rejected because it fails the flooding sequential test. My understanding of this test is that we can't build something if there's more suitable available land within the borough. So the two questions I have is, one question I guess is in two parts. Does that mean that nothing can now be built in Colic because there is, and other areas that are in the same flood band, because there is probably, by definition, more suitable land elsewhere in the borough? Thanks, Chair.
Unless the developer can demonstrate that their particular development can't be built on land at a lower risk of flooding. So I can't obviously comment, I can't apply a blanket, no, but obviously...
That's quite a high bar that we're putting.
That's national planning policy.
Yeah, but that's a high bar to any...
It is.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just wanted that clarified.
Just moving, I mean, very, very briefly, I don't want to, as you said, I don't want to detain you too long. Other authorities with a lot of flood zone 2 and 3 have taken the approach where they've said that this sustainable development can take place in urban areas or on the fringe of urban areas in higher flood zones, and that's considered preferable to lower risk areas in villages. So, for example, Rushcliffe's local plan does that. So that's something that we could look at in the future, because we're obviously drafting a new local plan. But at the moment, we have to apply the policy quite strictly.
Just very briefly, sorry. Do we have a policy statement on the application of this sequential flood test?
No, so that's why we are having to consider it having regard to the national policy at the moment, because our policy isn't specific on that.
Thank you. Any others from anybody else? So we're happy to note that item. Yeah. And I have no other urgent business, so thank you for your time, everybody, and good night.